October 26, 1942. In the South Pacific, a 24-hour battle is about to begin. 4 carriers, Japanese and American, on a collision course over the Santa Cruz Islands. 2 months earlier, U.S. Marines had landed on Guadalcanal, seizing the airfield the Japanese were still building. They named it Henderson Field, and the entire war in the South Pacific now hinged on it. The Imperial Japanese Army hurled itself at the airfield again and again, but without command of the sky overhead, every assault broke against American fire. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commanding the combined fleet, made the decision. The carrier strike force would go south to break the deadlock and retake the sky over Guadalcanal. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, leading the Third Fleet, was sailing to wash away the disgrace of Midway. 4 carriers lost there. This was his chance to answer for them. Rear Admiral Kakuji Kakuta of the 1st Carrier Division would direct the launch of every strike from the bridge of the carrier Zuihō. 4 carriers pressed south through the open Pacific: Shōkaku, Zuihō, and Zuihō. Together they carried the last veteran air groups of the Imperial Navy. The Americans had 2 task forces in the same waters, under Rear Admiral Thomas Kincaid. They had been ordered to find the Japanese and bring them to action. USS Enterprise was the only American fleet carrier left untouched since Midway. If she were lost, the Pacific would, for a time, have no U.S. carriers at all. Her sister Hornet was commanded by Captain Charles Mason, the same captain who had launched the Doolittle raid on Tokyo only 7 months before. On October 11th, the Third Fleet sortied from Truk, the great forward anchorage of the combined fleet. Their orders were simple: find the American carriers and destroy them. In Shōkaku's ready room, the order had arrived: strike the U.S. carriers, save the Guadalcanal campaign. Pilots took their seats in silence. Leading the torpedo bombers was Lieutenant Commander Shigeharu Murata. Less than a year before, he had led the torpedo strike on Pearl Harbor. At Pearl Harbor, his 40 torpedo planes had sunk or crippled 4 American battleships in less than 10 minutes. Today, he would lead another strike against another American fleet. Even at sea, it is said, Murata kept a photograph of his wife Chikako and their daughter on his desk, the only reminder of home he carried into battle. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Mamoru Seki, the dive bomber leader, gripped an amulet for good fortune in battle. A samurai's son, he had volunteered to lead the dive himself. Murata and Seki had flown together since Pearl Harbor. Each man knew exactly what the other was prepared to do, and neither expected to come back. The 0 pilots flying escort were veterans of Pearl Harbor and Midway. Their edge was still razor sharp, perhaps the finest carrier air group still afloat in the Pacific. On Zuihō, Lieutenant Zenji Abe gathered his dive bomber crews to read out their orders. Their target was any American carrier their scouts could find. Across the water, U.S. Navy Wildcat squadrons had spent months studying how to fight the Zero. They had learned not to turn with it, and how to use the new THAC weave to survive. In Hornet's hangar deck, ordnancemen hung bombs under the wings of dauntless dive bombers, plane after plane. Above them, the Pacific dawn was still hours away. PBY Catalinas from Espiritu Santo flew long, slow arcs over the open sea, searching for the carriers that everyone knew were coming. At 1400 on October 25th, a Catalina found them. The position of the Japanese strike force flashed back across the South Pacific. Knowing they had been spotted, the Japanese carriers swung sharply north to throw off the next contact. The hunters had become the hunted. Everything the combined fleet was pouring into the South Pacific was for one goal: to turn the tide at Guadalcanal. The cost would be measured in carriers and in men. For Nagumo, this was his chance to answer for the 4 carriers he had lost at Midway. Whatever came tomorrow, he would not turn back this time. And for Shigeharu Murata, hero of Pearl Harbor, this would be the day that decided everything. He had survived a year of carrier war. He had perhaps a few hours more. 0410 hours, October 26th. 7 Japanese scout planes are readied on the dark flight decks, well before dawn. The hunt is about to begin. At 0445, the scouts roar off the bow and fan out in a search arc, hunting for the American carriers somewhere in the dark below. At almost the same moment, 16 dauntless scouts lift off from Enterprise, sweeping the sea in the other direction. 2 navies, 1 ocean, searching for each other. Past 0600, the scouts of both navies have spread across hundreds of miles of South Pacific. Both sides no contact. Now is only a matter of minutes. At 0640, an American Dauntless sights the Japanese carriers and breaks radio silence. Across the fleet, alarms begin to sound. Almost simultaneously, a Japanese scout finds the U.S. task force and flashes the contact back to Nagumo's flagship. Enemy carriers sighted. Nagumo gives the order at once. Launch the first strike. Get the bombers into the air before the Americans can hit the Japanese fleet first. It is said Murata sprang to his feet, kicked back his chair, and called his crews to their planes. The waiting was over. He ran to his own Type 97 torpedo bomber, tailcode EI-301, and swung himself into the cockpit. Behind him, the rest of the squadron was already starting up. Seki climbed into his Type 99 dive bomber, EII-201, steeling himself to lead the dive. He had told his men he would put the first bomb on the deck. From Shōkaku, the escort Zeros launched first, climbing into position to shield the strike. Without them, the bombers would not survive the run-in. At 0710, 3 carriers begin launching together. 70 aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes, all roar off the decks at once. Murata's Type 97 torpedo planes climbed to 3,000 meters, joined into a tight formation, and turned south toward the enemy. Just after 0740, Enterprise begins launching too. Dauntlesses and Avengers, wave after wave, climbing into the morning sun. The 2 strike forces passed each other in flight, unseen, hidden in cloud, one of the most famous near misses of the entire Pacific War. Murata kept in radio contact with Seki's dive bombers, calling out positions and altitudes. Their 2 squadrons would have to arrive together, or neither would arrive at all. Hornet was also launching. Dauntlesses and Avengers, one after another, off her flight deck. Their target, the same Japanese carriers Murata had just left behind. Immediately after, the carriers scrambled Wildcat fighters to thicken the combat air patrol overhead. Everyone knew the Japanese were already on their way. The escort Zeros spread above, below, and to the flanks of the bombers, a moving screen against any American intercept that came at them on the run-in. At 0750, Kinkaid received word of incoming Japanese aircraft and ordered more fighters into the air, fast. The Japanese strike was now within 80 kilometers of the American carriers, closing fast through scattered cloud. Aircraft from Zuihō joined the main formation. The 70-plane strike was now complete and beginning its run-in toward the target. Murata briefed Seki on the final run-in over the radio. Torpedoes from the wave tops, dive bombers from 12,000 feet, both to strike together. On the horizon, the smoke of the American carriers came into view. The battle was almost upon them. Murata signaled the squadron to drop into attack formation. On Nagumo's order, Murata and 70 aircraft pushed on into the sky of the decisive battle, every man fixed on the targets ahead. For hours since the pre-dawn search, both carrier forces had been groping for one another across the empty sea. Now the searching was over. On the morning of October 26th, scouts and strike planes alike flew on, unaware they were racing toward a collision that would tear the heart out of both fleets. 0830 hours, the 70-plane Japanese strike is closing on the American fleet. Within minutes, every gun in the task force will be firing. At the same moment, U.S. Dauntlesses are diving on Zuihō. A bomb walks across her flight deck and detonates in a sheet of flame. Fire erupts from Zuihō's deck. Records show she is unable to launch or recover aircraft from this point on in the battle. She is out of the fight. American Wildcats are racing in to break up the incoming Japanese formation. They have only minutes to keep the bombers off Enterprise and Hornet. In an instant, Zeros and Wildcats are tangled in the air. The sky becomes a knife fight. Aircraft burn. Pilots die. The bombers press on through the chaos. Records show one escort Zero goes down, its pilot bailing out under parachute. He would land in the empty Pacific, hundreds of miles from any friendly ship. Through the dogfight, Murata's torpedo planes press on toward the carriers. Low and slow, they make the easiest target in the sky, but they hold formation. Through a break in the cloud, the long gray shape of USS Hornet swims into view, the target the entire strike has been hunting for. Seki spots her himself and signals the dive bombers behind him to begin the attack. His squadron tips over the edge and begins to fall. Hornet's combat air patrol surges to meet them. Every anti-aircraft gun she has opens up. The air around the carrier turns black with bursting shells. The battleships North Carolina and South Dakota join in. The sky over the task force is hung with flak, thicker than anything the Japanese have seen before. Caught between flak and fighters, Japanese aircraft go down trailing fire, one after another. Murata's escort is being whittled away one plane at a time. 0910 hours. Seki's dive bombers tip over and roll into their dive on Hornet, near vertical, accelerating through 600 kilometers an hour. Seki's own aircraft is hit on the way down, but it is said he never broke off the attack. Witnesses report he held the dive all the way to the deck. His 250-kilogram bomb strikes the flight deck. A blast tears through the carrier. Within seconds, the next Type 99 follows him in. Fire pours from Hornet's deck. Damage parties run for the flames with hoses and foam, dragging the wounded clear of the burning wreckage. Records show that the moment the bombs fall, Murata begins his own torpedo run, dropping his squadron almost to wave-top height. His torpedo plane is hit too, but he holds course and presses the attack. The American gunners cannot break his run. Several torpedoes drop together, white wakes streaking toward Hornet's port side. The American carrier has only seconds to turn, and she cannot turn fast enough. Bombs, torpedoes, and a crashed aircraft strike home in seconds. Hornet is, all at once, out of the fight. Her power gone, her deck wrecked, fires growing. 0930 hours. American Dauntlesses dive on Shōkaku. 3 bombs find her flight deck in quick succession. 3 direct hits tear apart her flight deck. Fires spread across the ship. She can still steam, but she can no longer launch a single aircraft. Of the first strike, 99 aircraft would never return. 148 aircrew were killed in a single morning, the cream of the Imperial Navy's veterans. Only the damaged survivors limped back toward the fleet, trailing fuel and smoke, half their formations gone. The dogfight between Zero and Wildcat had decided how few of the strike could ever return. The escort had been broken open, and the bombers paid the price. The Hornet, found beyond the clouds, was the prize the Japanese strike had been hunting. Now she lay burning on the surface, dead in the water. A burning Hornet was a sign Pacific carrier warfare had been pushed to its breaking point. Both navies had hit each other harder than either was prepared to absorb. 0945 hours. The Japanese launched their second strike from Zuihō, the only carrier still able to put aircraft into the air. Through a break in the clouds, scouts caught the silhouette of an American carrier, Enterprise, still under power, still a target. Dive bombers and torpedo planes held formation and rolled in on the target together, just as Murata's first strike had been ordered to do. U.S. fighters were scrambled to break the attack apart, the last Wildcats still capable of flying, climbing hard to meet them. South Dakota's anti-aircraft guns opened a wall of fire across the sky. 5-inch, 40mm, 20mm, every barrel firing at once. On the other side, American Dauntlesses scored 3 direct hits on Shōkaku. The Japanese flagship was now beyond saving as a combat carrier. 10-15 hours. A bomb punched through Shōkaku's flight deck. opening a wide gash, and detonated in the hangar deck below. Damage parties fought the fires for hours. The wounded were carried below, the dead laid out where the flames had been beaten back. With the deck torn open, no more aircraft could launch from her. The pride of the Japanese carrier fleet had been silenced by mid-morning. Aboard Hornet, the fires could not be brought under control. Her crew began abandoning ship by life rafts and cargo nets, swimming clear of the burning wreckage. She lost power, listed heavily, and the flames raced beyond reach. The American flag still flew, but no one aboard believed she could be saved. By the end of the day, Japan had lost 99 carrier aircraft in this single battle. Many of them had taken their crews with them into the sea. 148 irreplaceable veteran aircrew were dead. Among them, the most experienced strike leaders Japan had left in the Pacific. Seeing the losses, Nagumo ordered the carrier force to break off and turn north. There was no longer enough air group left to risk another engagement. Behind the retreating Japanese fleet, the smoke of Hornet stained the southern horizon. They were leaving a victory behind them, and a defeat as well. Heavily damaged, Enterprise crept away to the southeast under her own power. She would limp into Noumea with her flight deck still smoking. Crippled Shōkaku and Zuihō withdrew north, screened by their sister Zuikaku. Both would be out of the war for months of repair. The 4 Japanese carriers, only Zuikaku came out largely unharmed, but she had lost most of her air group in the day's fighting. American destroyers ringed the burning Hornet and began taking off survivors, one boatload at a time, through the slick of oil that spread out from her hull. Staff officers tallied the results and recorded the staggering depth of the aircrew losses. The numbers were worse than anyone had feared. The Americans had lost Hornet, and their one remaining Pacific carrier, Enterprise, was crippled. For weeks, the U.S. would have no operational fleet carrier at all. Even as the carriers tore at each other, the battle for Guadalcanal still raged on shore. The Marines were holding on by their fingernails. Sinking Hornet was a tactical victory for Japan. Losing those veteran crews was a strategic defeat that no victory at sea could undo. The men who fell that day could not be replaced, not by the time the war was decided. Japan's irreplaceable veterans were dying faster than she could train new ones. America had paid a heavy price too, in ships and in men. The carrier war in the Pacific went on, but neither navy would emerge from this day as it had entered. For one American carrier sunk, Japan had given away her future in the air. Empty hangars are simply replaced by industry. Empty cockpits are not. No further victory was within reach. Nagumo's fleet disappeared into the Northern Sea, leaving Guadalcanal still in American hands. 1300 hours, October 26th. Struck by 9 bombs and 2 torpedoes, Hornet was still afloat. The Japanese had not finished her, and the Americans could not save her. The destroyers Mustin and Anderson came alongside and tried to take the listing carrier in tow. For a few hours, it seemed they might still bring her home. After dark, Japanese submarines I-15 and I-170 struck at the towing party. The American screen could not keep them off forever. Below decks on Hornet, the fires spread beyond control. With every passing hour, the hope of saving her faded a little further. The last of her crew abandoned ship by rafts and nets, leaving the burning carrier behind. Above them, no aircraft remained on her shattered deck. American destroyers fired 9 torpedoes and over 400 5-inch shells into her, trying to send her down before the Japanese arrived. Hornet refused to sink. 0135, October 27th. Torpedoes from the Japanese destroyers Makigumo and Akigumo finally struck home in the night. At 0135 on October 27th, USS Hornet slipped beneath the waves. The ship that had launched the Doolittle raid was gone. Japan had lost veteran aircrew on a scale she could never make good again. The empty ready rooms of Shōkaku and Zuihō told the real story of the battle. Tactically, Hornet had been sunk. Strategically, 148 veteran crewmen had been lost. Historians have called it a Pyrrhic victory ever since. Each of those 148 men carried skill that could not simply be replaced. Their loss would echo through every battle Japan fought from this point on. Shōkaku and Zuihō were so badly damaged that both were out of the war for months. Japan's fleet of operational carriers had effectively been cut in half overnight. The Americans, by contrast, repaired Enterprise in just over 2 weeks and had her back in action by mid-November in time for Guadalcanal. On Guadalcanal, the fighting went on, and slowly, week by week, Japan was losing the sky over the South Pacific. The cost of Santa Cruz was being paid by the men on the ground. These 24 hours would change Pacific carrier warfare forever. No carrier-against-carrier battle that followed was ever fought on quite the same terms. Murata and Seki, heroes of Pearl Harbor, were both killed in the sky over Santa Cruz. Their names would be honored by the Imperial Navy until its last day. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands stands as one of the turning points of the entire Pacific War, the moment Japan's carrier offensive ran out of veterans. Both navies came away knowing the brutal limits of carrier-against-carrier combat. After Santa Cruz, no admiral on either side would commit a fleet quite so willingly to one open engagement. After this battle, Japan would never again hold the upper hand in carrier strength. Her 4 carriers had won the day and lost the war in the air. American industry kept turning out ships and aircraft faster than they could be sunk. Japan kept losing pilots that her training schools could never replace. These 24 hours decided the fate of the Guadalcanal campaign. Japan had spent her last veteran air groups for 1 American carrier and had nothing left for what came next. 4 carriers had fought that day. Each would now follow a very different fate, into repair docks, into the breaker's yard, or into the deep Pacific itself. Murata's family, it is said, later received his flight cap and a final letter, the only pieces of him that ever came home from the sea. 148 lives, 1 American carrier. The weight of what war took that day still echoes over these waters. The Pacific keeps its dead. Shigeharu Murata, the hero of Pearl Harbor, met his end in the sky over the South Pacific, leading the same kind of attack that had made him famous a year before. October 26, 1942, the 24 hours of 4 carriers, Japanese and American, had begun and ended here in these empty waters of the South Pacific. The 24 hours of the South Pacific. 80 years on, that weight has not faded, and the men who died in that morning sky are not forgotten.